It's time to figure out this door. It's looking pretty bad. Like, I suppose this is not necessarily all that abnormal. It must be fairly common because panels like this one are available. This particular panel came from LMC Truck, I think. If I remember right, there may be other suppliers that provide it as well. But this is a pretty serious rust problem, so it can't stay. And it is a little bit tricky, not terrible. Here's the problem. This has to hold its position, or it will cause interference if the door becomes too big. And if it becomes too small, you can end up with some strange noises, whistling and airflow that you hear in the cab as you drive down the road, especially at high speeds. So the trick is to get the new piece to sit as closely as possible to where the original piece was. I cut the old panel out along this line here. This line represents a complete replacement panel. Had I cut right along here, I would have used the panel in its entirety. I'm glad I didn't. For one thing, there is a brace right about here that ends at exactly that line. Just by dumb luck, I cut right where the brace bends inward, or I guess outward, toward the outer shell of the door. And so cutting along here didn't cut the brace. Cutting up any higher, I would have come across that piece of that brace. Cutting across here is mildly complicated because there is some structural metal behind here for the hinge to bolt to, but nothing terribly complicated. I did have to get a little bit creative along the bottom end here. The seam around the edge is, I'm treating it a little bit differently on this side than I am on that side. What's happened is that this portion of the door is compromised. The panel under here is quite rusted, and as a result, the material that was part of the original door beneath this seam where it's rolled over was rusted out and nasty. So I pulled it all out. I left, for the most part, the rolled section, even though there is some rust damage in there. We'll mitigate that with some rust inhibitor, but it gives me something to attach to. From here on, though, this metal is in good shape, and pulling the original piece out from underneath the roll was more complicated than what I wanted to get into. And structurally, this part looks good, and so tearing it apart would most likely disrupt and mess up the outer visible section of the door right here on the panel. So you can see right here, it changes from retaining the lip on the replacement panel to where here I cut it inward and cut off the lip along here. And now the welds, instead of being along here with the rolled edge, will be inset just a little along there. It is, of course, at this point merely tacked on. And the reason for that is, first off, you want to do it that way because if you get too much heat in one spot, then the sheet metal can warp and then things don't fit right. The other reason is that I'm a little bit concerned about door fitment. I think I'm in good shape because from what I can see, this replacement panel's gone in the same place that the old one came out. But until I get a trial fit on the truck to make sure that it's going to fit right, I don't want to overcommit. That's what I'm going to do next, is go slip it into place and just make sure that it fits. Yeah, so I hate it when the camera stops recording and I'm unaware. I thought I had videoed the assembly of this door as I welded the panel in place, as I welded that replacement piece into place. But evidently, the card filled up on the camera and it stopped. So I was unaware that it was not recorded. This is a little scary. I don't want to scratch the new paint, but I do want it to fit. And I think we're golden. Inside the door that runs from here, the inner panel, and goes down and then back up. And I'm not actually 100% sure what it's for. It might have something to do with a mechanism inside the door. But this bracket needs to come back up and be attached to the back side of the sheet metal right here. So what I've done is approximated where that mates to the surface here and made myself a mark. The thinking is that if I drill a little hole right here, I can then do a spot weld to hold it all together. That should weld that brace firmly to the outer sheet metal or inner sheet metal, and it seems to have done so. We're looking good. Let's see if we can stick this thing together little bit by little bit. Piece actually isn't too bad, but not hard to replace either. That's pretty decent. Pretty decent. Now we need a nice little bend in it at just the right spot. So right there is where the bend starts. Okay, that is reasonably clean, and most of that joint will get covered by the door panel, but I'm going to go ahead and clean it up with some of this Bondo just to make sure that anything that is exposed is clean. Besides, I don't know how long we're going to run before we get door panels. A little extra effort here will make it look quite a bit nicer, I think, in the beginning. To top it all off, it'll cover up some of my ugly welds right there. So there's that. So I welded that around, welded the seams, back of the door side, front, and there. Did a layer of filler, sanded it down a little bit, it's pretty close. Still a few little things that may need a glaze coat, but probably not. That really all gets covered when the panel goes on anyway. So I've probably already put more attention into it than it ever needs. But I think I'm done with the inside of the door. It's time to turn our attention to the outside. The mirror was mounted here, here, and here. These had bolts in them, but man, they're looking pretty sorry. This was welded right to the door. And then we have a fairly severe rust problem down here in this corner that we'll need to cut out. So, one at a time, we'll work our way through those. Mostly, same process. Cut it out, put in some fresh metal, weld the metal in, grind it smooth, apply a little filler if I need to smooth it out. Lather, rinse, repeat. The panel we see through the rust is the panel we just installed on the inside of the door. We really don't want to disrupt that any more than we absolutely have to. This one I'm going to start at the bottom, work my way up to the top, bending as I go. Not because I know that that's the best way, but because I can see that that should work. Seems logical, right? Let's try it. Grinder time. Before doing any body filler, I'm going to hit it quickly with this flap disc. This is 80 grit. I'm thinking body filler and lunch. That's what I'm thinking. We now have a couple of coats of body filler, and most of the areas are filled. We have a couple that are still needing some work, but we're going to smooth this out and see if any of these spots that we know about need any more filler. We're looking pretty good now. We're not 100% ready for paint, but we're pretty close. We have the holes patched up where the mirror was. We have this dent pulled and filled. Same thing down here along the rocker panel side of the door. Along to the back, this is where we pulled all the rusted metal out and built the triangular piece. A little bit of sanding is needed right there. That was a little low. There's some things here. Need to weld the door there. That side's looking pretty good. We are looking infinitely better on the inside. All of that rust in the corner on the inside panel is gone, completely replaced. We're matched up quite well with the original panel using a little body filler. The major shaping sanding is done, final sanding is not. And thanks to my good friend Pour 15 seam sealer, I now have the edges. This is a triple benefit. I get to seal, I get to do rust inhibitor, and I get to cover my atrocious welds all in one go. So that product is worth every penny, isn't it? So I'm happy with the way that turned out. There are some intentional vents or drains in those panels. That makes sense. We need some things to be able to flow out. We do not want water to catch in these rolled edges along the bottom. So some seam sealant there is quite important. Over here, it's less important because it's draining out of there anyway. But as mentioned, between the rust inhibitor and the covering properties, I'm pretty excited to go ahead and put that on there. So aside from final sanding, this one's ready for paint.